Welcome to the Human Evolution Podcast, where we dive deep into the science, philosophies, and strategies that create real and lasting change. I'm Goldstein, and here we leave traditional self-help behind and map the real terrain of true personal development.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm in Galveston now, for those who don't know. Love the place. The weather's great. It's 65 and sunny here. I know that you'd been here before and said it was real humid like Florida, and I did experience some of that when we first got here. And now there's just be a cold front coming through. I'm not too concerned with it. We have to go further south now if it continues in this direction. And I'm laughing because my hair, facial hair, and shirt match this couch. So for those that are just listening, my hair's gray, my beard's gray, my shirt's gray, and the couch is gray. So hopefully it doesn't just throw anybody off.
You're just a floating face at this point.
Pee Wee Herman had that. Was that Pee Wee Herman? Oh, there's a bunch of shows that used to do that with that stupid floating head thing. It's a heavy one. We haven't really talked about it in depth before. We're going to get into a little bit, just talk about like terminal illness and death and tools to kind of cope with that and ways to think about it. It's not, I don't want to use the term taboo, but it is in some respects. In today's people are thinking more and more about it, but especially in the West, we don't really live with our grandparents and parents at a certain point, and some of that is good. But in other cultures, they have everybody in the home, and then somebody becomes elderly. So you get to see the aging, and it's kind of more in your face. In the West, we're just like, people get to an older age, and I'm being a little cynical now, but some people just put them into, care homes and see them when they want to see them. So it's obviously something the human race, we all have in common, right? We're all going to die, so it's a weird subject, makes some people uncomfortable. Maybe it should, maybe people should start thinking more about talking about putting this one on for a while. And I figure let's get into it. And I'm dressed for the occasion. I've got gloomy clothes on. So anyway.
And I have my black background. But It's the thing you said about the West thing. I didn't really think about that before. But to me, I think that has a benefit and a cost associated with it, right? So in terms of the benefit, people don't necessarily have to see the people that they care about dying in front of them. From the cost analysis part of it is the fact that because it's not part of our lives the way it would be in a tribe or something else, I think the concept of your own mortality becomes something a lot more scary. And the idea of someone around you, you're used to them being healthy, and then all of a sudden you see them get sick. And you're not used to knowing what that means because you didn't see that happen to all the people around you. And so now what happens is you just don't have the coping mechanisms that you would if this was a natural part of our existence as it was in a tribal society, etc. I was just reading a book actually that was talking about the fact that a lot of tribal cultures have this. I think it's actually a pretty common thing in Hawaii, for example. I could be wrong about that, but I think it's in Hawaii, where death is actually something that's celebrated. It's kind of like it's a rite of passage. It's like your soul has moved on to the next level. Whereas for us, there's such a somber thought around it. And from a personal level, for me, it's just over a year ago, my father passed away, and he was the first person close to me that close to me that passed away. And so I got to experience things firsthand, and a lot of it wasn't what I expected. It was actually very interesting, and it gave me a very interesting view on things. Number one, for the amount of work I'd done on myself, and number two, for the things that cross your mind that you wouldn't expect them to cross your mind. Very, very interesting.
Can you expand on that a little? That's interesting, because obviously you've got, you're you with your history, and you've helped people through this hundreds, if not thousands of times. What was it about your father's passing that struck you as just like, I didn't see this coming when I should have seen it coming?
So the biggest thing that really got to me was the fact of unfortunately with my father, he was a very difficult personality. And so we were kind of watching him do bad things while he was still alive. And in the back of my head, I was just sitting there thinking, in a state of frustration for so long, sitting there thinking like, oh my God, who's going to do this? And then he's going to end up sick. And then it falls on us to basically have to do this. Like, he's not taking care of himself. And then fast forward a few years or a few months, whatever it's going to be. And now I have to deal with it. And I was getting so angry with him, watching him do these different things. So with my father, just to add a bit of color to it, was he got diagnosed with lung cancer. The surgeon looked at him, and they did the x-ray, and they said, look, it's stage 1 lung cancer. We just have to remove one portion of your lungs. And after that, you should be fine. No need for chemo, no need for radiation or anything else. My father got the surgery. Surgery went perfectly well. And all that was left for him to do at that point in time is what they call the golden window. It's basically between 1 and 3 months that you have to retrain your lungs to get strong again, because they've now had the trauma of removing the smallest lobe, but they did remove a lobe of the lungs. So he had to actually exercise his lungs and do these breathing exercises. My father, again, was a very difficult personality. And we're sitting there saying, Dad, did you do your breathing exercises? It hurts too much. I'm like, Dad, we don't care if it hurts too much. You have to do it. And he wouldn't do it, or he would say he did it. He's like, I'm doing it myself. And I'm like, Dad, that doesn't count. You've got to do this thing. There's a machine, and you watch the thing go up to know that you're blowing hard enough to strengthen your lungs, and you're not doing it. And in my mind, the whole time I was sitting there saying, like, I'm so annoyed with you because you're not strengthening your lungs. And the golden window passed. And unfortunately, after 3 months, the lungs are kind of like set into that scar tissue. And fast forward 3 months from that, my father died of pneumonia. Had nothing to do with lung cancer. And it was completely preventable had he done the exercises. So for those 3 months, I was so upset with him. Why is he not doing the exercises? Trying to push him to do the exercises. And the most interesting thing is, once he actually was in the hospital and we were actually seeing him pass, all that frustration I thought I would have, all that anger I thought I would have, simply wasn't there. And that was probably like the biggest shock for me, in terms of, like, I thought I'm going to be so upset with him because of all these different things. And all in all, I was looking at the man I loved so much. And all I wanted to do was just be there with him for the time that I had with him. And it was a truly beautiful experience, that all these thoughts I had in my head of how I'm going to be took away from the joy I could have had with him in that moment, and just accepting him for what he was. And then when the time actually showed up, the love I had in my heart was the thing that was the biggest thing for me. And none of that frustration I expected to be there, that was already there, like, because I was expecting it to be there 3 months before, none of that was even necessary. So I lost 3 months with my father from a place of just being too upset. And the interesting thing is, my sister, who had a very near and dear relationship with my father, who I thought it would take it very, very hard, and don't get me wrong, my sister definitely was strongly affected by it. But my sister, going through the experience with my father, completely transformed her relationship with death in such a beautiful way that now she just sees it so differently, that my sister and I, both of us, feel like we've got a nearer and dearer relationship with my father now than we did when he was alive.
That's interesting. I wonder if that holds universal. I'll just use, just from what I see around me, from the types of, like, my family and everything else. People get to a certain age, we put them somewhere, so we don't get to see necessarily the deterioration to a point, because you still visit and everything else. And then, of course, once they get towards the end, there's family comes in, there's more time. So it's not like you just put them away and never visit, although I'm sure some people do. It's kind of what we lose in our society these days, is we go through the hard part. We don't see the deterioration. Seeing that, regardless of the circumstances, I know, assuming he was a little bit older, because my father's older too, because you and I are about the same age. I just wonder if there's some therapeutic or cathartic benefit to being there. Like, it seemed to work for you and your sister. Got some people hold grudges and they're angry at their loved ones that are for 30 years they don't speak. So you unfortunately had to think about that for the few months that you were going through. But yeah, can you imagine having an issue in the family, and we got the holidays coming up. So, families either get together, they don't. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So this all kinds of ties into the air, accepting things for how they are. Like you say, your father, and he was a physician, right? So he knew better technically, but just letting go of that. And
to me, the biggest shift, and I know that we discussed this quite a bit when we're talking about the Emotional Alchemy Journal, and it all just ties in the same way, in terms of the fact that at some point in time in my life, I came up with a new definition of love. And I remember exactly when it was. It was when I came up with the thing that finally became the Emotional Alchemy Journal. But to me, growing up, the idea of love was this idea of, like, I'm always going to see you in the best possible light. And that's what I thought love was. If I love you, it means I'm always feeling positive emotions towards you. Now, going through those 3 months when my father was not doing the exercises, etc., I could have very easily gotten into a place of, I can't love this guy because he's not doing what I want, right? Like, it's just like, I want him to do all these different things and he's not doing it. And so right now I'm feeling anger, and why in the hell are you not doing it? And I want to love you. And because I love you, I want you to do these things because that is what you're meant to do for me. And the shift that happened in my mind like 20 years ago now was the idea of understanding that love is not seeing a person and wanting them to be this perfect version. Truly loving a person is seeing a person exactly as they are and accepting them for what they are. If I truly love you, then what happens is I also have to love the fact that you're a dumbass sometimes. I also have to love the fact that you're angry sometimes. I also have to love the fact that you don't want to be around me sometimes. In which case, I accept you exactly the way you are. And so to me, the concept of love is unconditional acceptance. And so to bring this back to your statement is, so very often when a person says, I love my mother, and let's just take that for example, but I keep a distance from her. Now, when we're together at family gatherings, why in the world does my mother drive me so crazy? I just can't be around her, blah, 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 blah. And inside of themselves, they have this internal struggle going on saying, I shouldn't feel this way about my mother. I shouldn't feel this way about my mother, but I do. And that internal struggle, what happens is when they leave that family gathering, it makes them not feel comfortable talking to their mother again. And it makes them want to have a distance because there's one part inside of them that says, I should be talking to my mother. And there's another part inside of them saying, but I really, really, really don't want to. And that struggle forces them to feel a sense of guilt and a sense of shame over their entire existence. And then what happens is when their mother passes, they've got this unresolved issue that sticks with them forever. Whereas if you just love your mother and you say, Mom is getting older, she's going to drive me crazy. That's what Mom does. I don't expect her to not do that. I don't need her to be the perfect mother. I need her to be exactly who she is. And that means she's going to be the person that makes me want to set her on fire and run out the house. Like that's just who she is. If I can accept that, and she still drives me crazy, but I don't feel guilty over the fact that she drives me crazy, and I don't need her to be someone else. I just accept her for what she is. What happens is then I can talk to my mother over the course of the next few months. And I know that those conversations will be annoying, but I'm just going to accept her for being who she is. And then when she passes, I don't have this strong sense inside of myself of this unhealed relationship. I've got the sense of she was who she was, and that's just the way it goes. And another one of the big revelations that happened for me that really, really made a difference is so many people, and I'm using myself as an example because I think that that's kind of helpful, but at the same time, I'm talking about this as hundreds, perhaps even thousands of clients at this point that have had the same kind of issue that I've dealt with. And that what happens is they go through the 5 stages of grief. Stage 3 is bargaining, kind of like saying, God, if this were to happen, please bring them back. I'll be a good person, whatever it is. And the interesting thing is, after my father passed, I moved through everyone has to move through all 5 stages, but I moved through the bargaining stage extremely quickly because the fact of the matter is I didn't want my father back. And that sounds really disgusting, so I'll definitely qualify and explain that. But the thing is, the person that passed away, the person that was in hospital, if that person came back, all I'm doing is I'm bringing back a person filled with suffering and pain, and his brain is giving out on him and so many different things. And so people say, oh God, could I please just have my father back? And it's a very selfish request because you're asking for the worst version of them to come back. Whereas the thing that you really want is the person that died for you 20, 30 years ago that you still remember being the superhero. That's the person you want back. You don't want the person that just passed away back. And so if you truly love the person and you see this person for the last 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years or however long it is was truly suffering, and now their suffering is over, you don't want them to come back. You are very happy that their suffering is over. And you remember in your heart, and this is another part that we'll get into maybe a bit later, you remember in your heart who the person was 20 years ago that you didn't even have at this point in time, but that this is a person you can maintain the relationship with because the person that was suffering is gone.
I hate to bring this up. I think like it still applies because people treat pets like members of the family too. But when you talk about suffering and the person they were when they passed, even if you haven't had like a close loved one die or family member die, most of us have had pets. And it reminds me of those people that will put a dog through all different types of treatments. And first of all, the dog doesn't speak English, so you can't explain to the dog, I'm taking you to chemo, it's going to hurt, kind of thing. So, they're not the same thing, but it reminds me of that, to say the word selfishness, but it's almost like you have to let him go at some point. And you make a really good point, because if you could have extended his life by a week, not getting back the best version that you had of him, all you're doing is just prolonging, him laying and just being miserable. So.
Exactly. And it's a very, very selfish thing when you look at it from that point of view. And I completely understand that people are there. But to a large degree, what you're really doing is you're sitting there saying, like, I know you're suffering, but stay with me. As opposed to sit there saying, I know you're suffering, and whatever is best for you, move on, and I will keep you near and dear in my heart. And should you heal, amen, of course I want you back. But you're still never going to be that person I knew from 20 years ago. Like, that person unfortunately died 20 years ago. So every moment you have with someone, you're never going to get that person back. You're always going to get a person that's a moment older or a year older or 20 years older, whatever it is. And if you keep bargaining to get that person back, even if you got that person back, even if you got the person back, you're not getting that person back.
You're not the same either. That old Marcus Aurelius thing, you can't step in the same river twice because the river's different and
Perfect
you
saying.
are different. So how do you think about, you've got people obviously pass from old age and complications. I mean, we all die of something, right? I think in our DNA, the oldest person to ever live was 120. At a certain point, things just go. There's usually something. There's a health issue. Now we can go and do an autopsy. We can identify like, oh, it was this. It was cancer. It was this disease or whatever. 50, 60 years ago when medical technology wasn't that great, sometimes they didn't even like, he was 55. That's when he was supposed to go. It's probably a heart attack. You know, things, client work, for example. Somebody goes at 90. It's still sad, but they're 90. You know, let's be honest.
Exactly.
But when somebody dies young or gets diagnosed with a terminal illness, how do you weigh that with clients?
It's very much a different approach. And for me, thank God, I had my father through all of my childhood. What about a person and I'm sorry if this strikes a chord with someone that's listening, but what if a mother's pregnant and gives birth to a stillborn, or a child that is born with a terminal disease and they've meant to have their whole life in front of them. And I specifically wanted to throw in that word of they're meant to have that whole life in front of them, because what's going on in that moment is that the person is, and that then they get stuck in the grief stage of sitting there saying that this is not the right thing. They're in anger and they're not accepting what really is. And to tie these two together, but we're going to go a bit deeper, is at the end of the day, if a person did die, if you're asking for them back, yes, maybe you can rewind past before the car accident or before something happened. But a person died because something in their body went very, very wrong, right? Mm-hmm. So it's whatever it is, death was probably the best course of action in terms of physically for them in that moment. But it's not to say that had the 2 minutes where the person was in a car accident was taken away, the person would have been perfectly fine. But still, the car accident happened, the person now has brain damage, death was probably the most logical thing. The person swallowed a poison, their body gave out on them, then they died. But had they not swallowed the poison, of course, you would be dealing with a very different person. So I understand that, but it's still, you can't step in the same river twice, where the situation that caused the death did happen. And so to take that one step further in terms of the way it's done with a client is it's a matter of getting rid of the shoulds in your mind, because at the end of the day, this whole universe is a roll of the dice. Everything here is random. And if you sit there saying, I rolled a 3, but I should have rolled a 1, you shouldn't be sitting in the casino in the first place, unfortunately, right? It's one of those things. And so what you have to do is you just have to look at reality for what it is and just say, this is so easy for me to say right now, and it's going to come across as completely heartless, but I need you all to understand that, when it's done in a session, it's a matter of a lot of work to get there. And it may be multiple sessions, it may be a lot of time of journaling, whatever it is. But you have to get to a place of understanding the fact that what is. And the person is dead. And what you want as a should doesn't factor into reality, unfortunately. And the more you try and live in a should world, the more you're actually stepping away from what reality is showing you. And you start moving into stage 2 and 4, which is going to be bargaining and depression of the grief stage, where either you start bargaining, trying to make things different, or you just hit in depression. And depression is usually where you sitting there saying things are not the way that they should be. But there is no should be, unfortunately, in reality. There's only a should be in imagination.
I think we should drill down on the stages for sure. Before we do that, what is a common regret that you hear? Then imagine it would be, I wish we had more. I wish I hadn't said this to him at Thanksgiving. I wish we'd reconciled this. Is there like a through line there?
I'd want to talk more to a grief counselor about that, because the truth is, when I work with a person, I don't want to go into their story as to what they're regretting. I want to go into their emotions and their beliefs they're holding in the first place. But I can tell you, in terms of what is a common feeling, it's a feeling, and it's weirdly enough, you'd expect it to be a feeling of sadness, but more often than not, it's a feeling of guilt. They feel guilty that they should have done more. They feel ashamed that they were bad in some way. And then the second one is from the other side. So guilt is when it's placed upon me. Sorry, pardon me, covering the microphone. Guilt is when it's placed upon me. And the other one is anger, when you're angry at the other person and you don't have that resolved issue. And so what you end up doing with a person one way or another is you have to get them to a point that what they can do is that they can look at reality for the way it is and to basically see it as an entire holistic picture and see the person as wherever they are, they're there. It's like, and whatever you didn't say doesn't make a difference anymore. And again, it's so easy for me to say in a matter of 2 seconds here in a conversation, but like I'm talking about the final outcome that you're aiming for here. So just to quickly go through the 5 stages of grief, the first stage is going to be denial. You're just going to be in a place that you're just sitting there saying, this isn't happening, right? Like, it's just like, this can't be real. It's not really happening. Your brain, it's just such a shock in the moment that you're denying it. Okay. The next stage after you're denying it is you're going to be jumping straight into anger. And so you're now angry at yourself, at God, at the other person, at the situation for what it is. And you're holding on to the anger. And some people just get stuck there in so many different ways. And that's what we're saying. It's either anger at yourself or anger at the other person. And then the next one is now you're going to start bargaining, right? So now you're going to sit there basically saying, like, it's like, if something was different, God, if you could please make it different somehow, like let me just know that they're good somehow, like something. You're trying to like somehow move through your anger by bargaining for it. And then when you realize that there's no answer to it, you just go into depression, where you just make yourself numb and you just can't deal with it at all. And then the final step, after you finally move through the depression and you get stuck in it, is that you finally have to hit the stage of just acceptance, accepting what it is. And then to bring this back to the concept of love, like I said, if I truly love you, my definition of love is I unconditionally accept you. In the same way, if you think about what loving life is or loving reality for what it is, it's if I truly am expecting reality to be different than what it is, that reality should be something, I'm not living in reality. What I need to do is I need to unconditionally accept reality for what it is, and then I can live in reality and I can love my life for what it is. And so those are the 5 stages as such in terms of what's going on here.
Some stages may be faster for others, but I wonder what makes those, generally speaking, those 5 stages universal to. That's even like a shared universal human experience from across cultures and everything else.
Now, the one thing I want to say, though, is like it is a shared universal human experience, but I need you to understand that some cultures, like, for example, like I said, the Hawaiians, if I'm correct about that, they just don't go through grief in the first place. It's like they don't see the loss of the person as something to grieve about. But like you can grieve over the loss of a job, you can grieve over the loss of a pet, you can grieve over the loss of a phase of your life. And that is very often what happens in a midlife crisis, that you sit there going, that you finally realize the fact that you're older, and now all of a sudden you're now in a place of sitting there saying like, oh God, like I can no longer do those things I used to do. So what am I going to do? I'm just going to first go into just absolute denial. That's wrong. I can still be a 5-year-old and I can still drink whatever I want. And I can still do whatever. Now you're angry. God damn it. Like, this isn't the way it should be. Now you're bargaining. Like, what if I work out more? Like, could I actually get there? And so when you think about it, like, and the reason why I went over it in this way is you can see that this is just the way the thought process works, right? Like, it's just like the first thing you do, you have shock, right? You have shock. What you're going to do is it's not really denial, let's call it shock. But like, I mean, like you're having a problem processing reality. And because you're still slightly stuck in the old reality, you're in denial of it. You're still stuck in what it is. Now, thinking about what the final endpoint is, as I said, is love of reality, and that's complete acceptance. Now we just fill in the next 3 steps. So when you don't accept reality for what it is, you're in denial. The next thing is, now that you actually see reality, you don't want this reality. You just plain simply do not want it. So what happens? You get angry. Now, when anger doesn't work, the next thing is you become a victim of reality. Becoming a victim of reality means that now all of a sudden, it's not something that's actually holding you down that you have to completely surrender to. So you feel like maybe you can fight against it. The easiest way to fight against it is to try bargain. So what can I do differently to not be in this pain that I'm in right now? And then once you realize that you are held down and that there's nothing you can do, and regardless how much you try to fight reality, you can't get there, you hit depression. You're just stuck with it. And then eventually what happens is, and this kind of goes back to my ayahuasca experience for a moment, is when you finally go to a place that you are just completely a victim to circumstance, you hit that depression until finally you get to that place of sitting there saying, I guess I just have to surrender. And the moment you surrender, acceptance happens because reality is what it is. So it's a very logical thing. I mean, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, I believe, is the one that first mentioned it. It was just like, it just makes perfect sense when you just consider how people are trying to just cope through reality.
One of the mistakes people make is even the ones that are aware that there's these different stages, things they have to work through, like the grieving stage, for example. And you make a really good point about different cultures. Some it's a celebration of life versus a terrible tragedy. And there's some religion mixed in with that, but not all. I mean, a lot of organized religion gives people comfort. As everybody has a different take on death, for sure. And it's not worth going down that road because it's too scattered. But it goes for not just death, but like a terrible divorce or something. Like, you're supposed to just let sit. And if you have to grieve, just let yourself grieve. If it has to be 3 months, it has to be 3 months. If it's 3 days, it's 3 days. And I think that people hear these clinical terms like the stages of this, and they're like, okay, well, I'm going to do stage 1 for a week, and then I should be better by now. You know what I mean? I think they feel like they have to rush themselves through it, when the truth is you don't. If you have to sit in a certain stage, you have to give yourself, I think, the space to do so.
Absolutely. And I do want to take this in terms of like, I mean, the kind of things that I do with clients and actually make this something that's actually useful for the listeners as a whole. And that's why I brought up the fact that there's some cultures that don't go into grief in the first place. And so, again, I'm just going to use personal experiences, but again, it's just because I want to make it something that someone can actually hold on to. My grandmother passed away when I was 22, somewhere in that range. And I was living in America at the time, and she was living in Israel. Loved my grandmother to bits. And every single time I ever spoke to her on the phone, it was just the most beautiful, enjoyable conversation. And I always look forward to speaking to my grandmother on the phone. It was once a week. It was like we would talk. I would call her up. She would call me up, whatever it was, and we would talk once a week. And I always looked forward to those conversations. And then when my grandmother passed, the interesting thing I experienced was I didn't have any grief. There was just no grief inside of me. It wasn't something I did on purpose. It just wasn't there. And what I realized was what was going on inside of my head at the time was I was so used to, like, let's just say I spoke to my grandmother every Thursday, which I think was true. When Monday came, I kind of like looked forward to speaking to my grandmother, and I had that thought in my mind that I'll talk to her in a couple of days. You know, it's like, it'll be great. Tuesday came, and I was like, great. And Wednesday came, and I said, like, I'll talk to her tomorrow. So I had that ability to just kind of like know my grandmother was there, and I just wasn't going to talk to her today. And I had that 6/7 of the time for me, just the one day a week, I knew I would talk to her that day. And what happens is in NLP, the thing that I actually do with a lot of people, there's the grief process. And what you do in the grief process is you look at the person that has passed. And what you do is you put them into a place in your mind as, I could talk to them if I wanted to, just not today. Because when it's all said and done, the human mind, one of the biggest challenges that we have that creates grief is the human mind doesn't know how to process a nothing. If I told you right now, imagine nothing, you'll imagine black at best. But black isn't nothing. There's still something there that you're imagining. When you think about death, your brain doesn't know what to conceptualize. And so you're just stuck in this place of just not knowing, where is this person? What am I missing? Whatever it is. Your brain doesn't know how to process a negative. And death is the minus of a person in your life. So what the process that you really need to do, the thing is to actually deal with the grief, the place that acceptance comes, is getting to that place of understanding the fact that that person is still in your life, in your heart, in whatever way you want to do that. And you're just not going to talk to them today or tomorrow. And when you get to that place of just accepting the fact that that person is there for you and you're just not going to be talking to them, it's what so many religions talk about. It's the idea of the person is near and dear in your heart. But there's a very specific process that you go through. And that's why I wanted to bring up the idea with my grandmother that she passed. And to this day, I still have that thought of I could pick up the phone and call my grandmother. I just won't do it today. So I hypnotized myself unknowingly at that point into a place where it just felt more comfortable. And knowing that process and having done it with thousands of people, I did the same thing with my father. It took me a while to get there. I had to first process through my own personal guilt and anger and whatever it was. And thank God it wasn't a lot of it, but it would be crazy to say it wasn't there at all. But then what I got to was the idea of remembering my dad's house, remembering sitting down with him and saying, like, I'll go visit him, just not today. And that in itself just creates that sense of comfort inside of you because now your brain has something to hold on to.
That's very powerful. It's the unknown that we can't stand. This is a bad example, but I'm going to apply it to like just daily life. In London, on the tube, the subway station, people would lose their minds when the trains wouldn't show up on time. And then when they put the next train will be here in 5 minutes, this is a terrible analogy to apply to death, but just for like daily
Perfect
things.
analogy.
And people are like, oh, okay. Then they would just sit and like, they would like, I'm going to read the paper. But when the unknown drives humans crazy, but if it's not true, just a way to kind of just get through and be healthy and not sit and wallow, because life has to go on. You have to take care of yourself and you have to do the best you can. So that's great advice, man.
I don't really know if this is something that I read somewhere, if something I made up myself, but it's something that I really like. And so each time I rephrase it, but basically the largest torment of the human mind is an unanswered question. It's like, if you're stuck in that, I think it's easier to be in heaven or in hell than to be in limbo and not know which place you're going to, right? And so when it comes down to the idea of a person passing, if you don't have, you've got that thought of like, where are they? What's going on? I don't know how to deal with this. Until you get to that place of, I know how to deal with it, you're stuck. And so the whole idea here is, as best as possible, to just, and this is something that NLP or hypnosis is called future pacing, is seeing yourself feeling comfortable thinking about the person. Because what happens is, the moment a person dies, what you do is you imagine the person and you say, oh, they're gone. And you remove it from your mind. Now your brain is stuck with that unanswered question. So what do I fill it in with? So if I can just have your brain fill it in with the sense of, that person is there and I'm just not going to talk to them today, you're good to go. If you're religious and you fill it in with the thought of, that person has gone up to heaven and they're in a happy place, you filled in that question. If you're an atheist and you say, that person is now buried and they're gone completely and I'm comfortable with that and I will do the same, and you really are comfortable as an atheist, that works too. But if you don't have the answer completely set up in your mind, you're still leaving that little vague openness, and that little vague openness is where the pain sets in. And that's where you start fighting against reality, and then you go through your denial, anger, etc.
You get into a spiral and you end up doing more damage to yourself for something that's completely out of your control. So the next we'll get into, and we'll make this a 2-part series because it's very powerful information, and was terminal illness and premature death. When I say premature, early death is somebody who doesn't live to old age. And we want to get into not only strategies and tools and things you can do to help cope when you're the one who has the terminal illness, and also for the loved ones, we want to get into some tools and things that can help people out that are dealing with somebody in their family or a friend that's terminally ill.
Absolutely. Like, I mean, we can talk as much as we want about the grief. It's still going to be the grief process, but it's so interesting that, like, I mean, again, the mind just doesn't know how to process an unanswered question. So now that you're stuck with a person, your brain is already now going into the imagination phase, whether it's for yourself or for another person, of what happens when they're gone. And it's still the exact same thing, but there's a lot of processes that you can do in the moment. And it's what I call the pre-grieving process, where grief is going to come. So what you do is you fix things up ahead of time. So if you do it right, you never even hit grief in the first place. You just hit a place of just wonderful acceptance and just loving of yourself in the situation. But that is obviously, I mean, we're not necessarily all the Buddha, and a lot of people have stuff to do. Yeah. But in a way, it's more difficult. In a way, it's a lot more beautiful, because it also gives you a moment to actually deal with a person or yourself while you're still here. And so there is a lot of beauty there. So I'm looking forward to that one too.
It's amazing. Yeah, we're really looking forward to that. And if you could all do us a huge favor and hit like and subscribe while you're here. It's at no cost to you, and it kind of helps us keep the show going. So we appreciate that. I always forget to throw that in. We have thousands and thousands of views, and I think 80% of them are from people who are not subscribed. So I just wanted to throw that out there. We appreciate all of you. And I do it too, man. I watch YouTube videos all day and I don't hit subscribe. So I'm guilty of it. Just wanted to put that out there. We do appreciate all of you.
And I'll also say that I actually love reading through the comments and actually see what people have to say. Like, I mean, if you've got something to say, share it. I will most probably read it myself. And if there's something if you got a question, I'd love to answer it. I love knowing what people have to think about stuff.
Everybody take care, be well, and we'll catch you next week. To be continued.
Thanks so much.
Hey everyone, it's Lee. Just one more thing before you go. Ever wondered how journaling could help change your life? You can find out by downloading the Emotional Alchemy Journal from the link in the description. It's a powerful tool for deep self-reflection, and it's completely free. And if you're looking to connect with Ori and learn more about how he can help you, visit his website at origoldstein.com. A link will also be in the description. Until next time, keep challenging the chaos within, be a little kinder to yourself, and let's continue to evolve together.